I think you guys need to have a discussion about that and decide how you'd like to proceed with that.
Tim, before we discuss that per se, could someone outline the pilot deviation and what this does from the standard pilot program? This proposal deviates from the standard pilot program. Can you just explain what the difference is between the standard pilot program and what the deviation would be?
The IDA has adopted a uniform tax policy that says that if applied for, IDA would provide a real property tax exemption that follows the format and the percentages of the 485B program. 485B program, I'm sure the attorneys can correct me if I'm wrong on any of it. 485B program is a program that all taxing jurisdictions, I'm talking about county, school district, and town, not special district, are in, and that provides a 10-year property tax program that starts at 50% and increases until it's 100% in year 11. That's the 485B program, which taxing jurisdictions, as I said, unless they opt out or change that, they have the right to change those exemptions. But if they don't, they are in that program, and the county IDA has adopted that policy. Within that policy also is a prohibition, of which now New York State has passed back into law, prohibition of retail businesses and service businesses unless certain specific or certain criteria is met. So what is meant by deviation is that we have had an application that is requesting that the IDA provide benefits that are different than the policy that has been adopted. And that procedure involves sending by the IDA letters to each taxing jurisdiction talking and outlining that deviation and that we have received that deviation request.
Okay. So the item you're considering for number one, we previously discussed in the application proposed phases 2 and 3 are built at one time. In years 1 to 8, no taxes. In year 9, 50%, and 10 through 15 increased by 10% a year. So I'm asking for guidance from the board as to whether or not you want to keep that, or basically just do it straight for each phase, 6 years, no taxes.
I don't believe we should exceed 6 years for no payments on any of the phases. And therefore, given year 7 years.
I would support that.
Any other comments on that?
I would support that also.
Thank you.
All right, so it'll be as indicated in the last synopsis draft of November 3rd. I assume the 15-year sunset. Has anybody got, we discussed that at the last board meeting, and that got approved at the last board meeting. Is there any other comment about that?
Number 2?
Yeah. Number 3, what about the requested pilot for the existing building for the next 5 years, starting with 2015, freezing the taxes at $88,650 per year, which is the actual payment for would be the actual payment for 2014 based on the assessment.
Gentlemen?
I don't believe we should consider this on the existing building.
Jim, anything?
I agree with Sid. The pilot's run its course, and the extension I don't think is necessary at this point, so I would remove that.
I should mention the pilot, the current pilot on the existing building does expire this year.
Yeah.
further?
I agree with
I concur.
Okay, so in considering pilot number 3 for the existing building will be deleted. Clawback provisions per the IDA clawback policy. Everybody comfortable with that? Some type of pilot mortgage, security pledge, everybody's comfortable with that?
Yes, yes.
The administrative fee, $1,500 per year. Agency to have the power to act on behalf of the company if there's a default. I think that those are general standard terms in all pilot documents anyway. Now let's talk about the default provisions. And I think the main default provision is you need to decide what starts a default in connection with the company's FTE, which means full-time employees, job level, and then so for purposes of starting the discussion in the default provisions, the number 240 is used in the current synopsis, so that if they go below 240, that triggers a partial default. In the current proposal, or in the current synopsis provisions, the application states FTEs are 254. This gives the company some leeway. And then consider a partial loss of pilot benefits if the FTEs go below 240. It was suggested by a couple board members that if we do that, it should be 30%. And then full default if the FTEs go below 225. So those are not set in stone, but just basically are starting point for this board's discussion on those issues.
How that is reported by the company is that annually, we send out letters to collect information on the number of employees of full-time, part-time, as part of our agency audit, as well as having to report these on an annual basis to New York State, which you can go on our website to the annual, I think it's in our annual report link. And you can see all the IDA pilots and projected versus actual employment statistics. It is a snapshot in time. We do it once a year, so it is that day. And those are, as I said, signed by the company and returned to us and compiled.
So for discussion is the number of FTEs to begin with, and also the percentage of partial default
And then the full default level.
and the full default level. Exactly.
Just so we're clear then, so we're talking about 254 current employees, and an expansion is going to add 21 full-time employees, so we're talking about 275. And a partial default, if that's reduced by 35 employees, over 10%. That's what we're saying then, right?
Correct.
I mean, I guess there should be some leeway, I just wonder if that's too much leeway.
Mention leeway on number of employees before
Right.
the partial kicks in.
Right. And I also wonder if the partial of 30% is the right number to be using.
What's been our practice in the past? Can we do 30%?
It hasn't. We generally just had a default provision.
No partial?
No partial, and the pilots that I've worked on since being there, those are the first pilots that have had recapture provisions included in them.
Yeah, we had the local ocean one where there was some partial on the local ocean one as well. Which
Right.
ended up being revoked because they didn't perform.
Revoked, and the idea to receive every penny that was due, though.
That's right.
Because of the pilot mortgage.
That's right.
So that has worked.
But I think that they went to like a 90%.
I don't remember.
Yeah, there was some language in that one, I think. But generally, I think that the thought process is, if there's a really significant amount of employment, you want to consider giving some leeway.
This entire process is based upon employment. And, you know, assuming the company can live with it, I think we should raise the numbers as high as we can and get as close to the current base of about 250.
Yeah, just to be clear, so this portion that we're talking about is employment, but all those other factors that I talked about right at the beginning should also factor into this decision too. Employment, significant investment, those sort of things. And effect on tax jurisdictions and reimbursement of tax jurisdictions. So you have to be careful.
Existing base too.
Yes, exactly.
I think too, gentlemen, that there should be something included in there in case of a catastrophic event in that situation. Suppose there was a fire that happened or something such as that, and it would completely maybe annihilate the employment for months or so. I think there has to be some issue that addresses that issue, that is act of God or something such as that. That would affect this, providing that the company's going to rebuild and so forth.
Yeah, I'm not sure where the employees would go in the meantime, but we can basically factor that into any kind of document.
I agree with you. There's no factor in there. Unless,
No, and the company can always come back and
Right.
ask the board to reconsider it for them. That's always what the company.
I think it-
There are so many, I'm sorry,
No,
Jim,
go
but
ahead.
there are just so many events that anybody can consider that would affect us, and you try to be as careful as possible, but you can't think of everything.
It could be a severe recession, you know, I mean, nobody knows the future, so I think the 240 is all right. Tough call.
I think
About
it-
30%, is that the correct number?
Well, that's,
I'd rather see you play with a percentage as opposed to the employees, just for that very reason, that we could hit a terrible recession, and it'd be nice to, you know, certainly would like to give them some latitude, but maybe the percentage needs to be adjusted accordingly.
Well, I would suggest then that if we leave the employment numbers as they are, that the percentage be 50%.
I would agree with that.
But Bruce was saying just the opposite, that it, you know, that if you get a higher amount with a lesser percentage decrease, that would.
No, I think that we, the employees, let's give them some latitude on the employee side, on the number of employees, should they have to lay some people off through the recession, or maybe adjust the percentage, that was my position. I'm not sure 50% is the right number.
I think 50 would be a reasonable number if you leave the employee number at what is proposed here.
At the 240.
Yeah, I think that would be. And again, as with any of these numbers, correct me if I'm wrong again, Ted, Joe Scott. If there's a catastrophic event or there's severe recession such as we hit in 08, 09, the board or the company could petition to the board for relief. I would assume. So, but to keep it at 240 with a 50% going below 240 until full default at 225 is pretty tough. It's a tough restriction within the pilot, but potentially a good compromise.
Gentlemen? 50%? Okay. Good with that, Jim?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
240, 50% if it's between 240 and 225, below 225 is default, total default.
Okay.
And the rest of these default provisions, except for the last one, which we'll discuss in a minute, are pretty standard. Completion of the project within 3 years, failing to construct, discontinuing business, failing to pay the pilot. And these are all basically standard provisions through K. K is something to discuss.
Can I just
Yeah.
explain a little bit about if the company does not pay the pilot?
Right.
The company will have an opportunity to either way have a mortgage on the property, which then, if the company does not pay, we would exercise that mortgage, and/or they could, as an alternative, put up a cash deposit that the IDA would hold in escrow until the pilot is terminated. And it's usually a pilot, it's in an amount that is equal to 1 year of taxes. And the reason that is that if they don't pay that, we exercise that, we immediately put it back on the tax roll. So then it becomes taxing jurisdiction's responsibility to continue to collect taxes. So that's why that mortgage or that deposit would be equal to 1 year of taxes.
Understand?
My question, 8B.
That's it?
8B.
8B?
Sure.
If it takes a while for the CEDC and company to make arrangements for this land purchase, should the company be penalized if the completion of phase 1 is delayed? Can we set another, instead of setting it from the date of approval, can we put in something else?
This is the date of our approval, I think.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
Because they've got planning board issues they have to go in front of, and
Well, whatever
they could be stalled for a number of reasons.
Yeah. Maybe instead of the date of approval, give them 6 months to 3 months to put it together with CEDC.
I was just thinking though that the 3 years might have included a factor for that already. I mean, 3 years is a pretty long time for build out. Wasn't the projected build out a couple of years from the start?
Yes.
So I think that the 3 years was basically an extra year.
Well,
So basically-
nothing will start until the spring,
Yeah.
so we're already 6 months.
Another question on that, when we're talking about the number of years, if you go back to phase 1, 1 to 6 years, no payments, when does that time frame start?
When is year one?
CO is issued.
All right, the other two say the CO upon issuance of CO, but it doesn't say that in
Yeah,
number 1.
but it would be also when the CO is issued for number 1.
So it could be 3 years of build out and then 6 years of no payment,
Right.
so 9 years.
Could be.
The idea being that you don't apply the agreement during construction. That's the concept here. That's why CO is fairly typical in that provision.
And don't forget that during construction, they will be paying taxes.
It will be.
Sure.
That was a question. I
Sure,
had,
because
too.
they're gonna have to purchase the land and it goes on the tax roll. And then when the CO is issued, that Joe just described, why use the CO. But they would be paying taxes.
It would be a partial assessment, I guess.
So if they acquire the land in the next 3 months or so, they'll go on the tax roll next year.
Yeah. Yes.
So that'll be year 1? Okay, now,
No.
I don't know.
So it's 3 years of paying taxes during construction and then 6 years of no taxes.
Because you also want to be receiving the economic benefit of the project when the pilot becomes effective.
Well, then back to 8B, do we think 3 years is enough? Sid?
Yeah, if that was already taken into consideration, which is, I mean,
I want to, for the board to 8K, if the property is sold, that would be a default, but also if the current ownership interest, which I believe is the Ginsburg's family, is sold, that's also the same thing as the property being sold, and we suggested in this synopsis 51%. In other words, they lose their control of any of the 4 companies.
now there are 4 companies that we know of, so that includes all 4.
Right. Right?
Yeah.
Could we at least list the companies in that, item
Yeah, listed them in number 10,
Oh, okay, all right.
DNJ Properties LLC and G's Best, but also the operating companies, Ginsberg's International Foods, Inc., and Hudson Valley Logistics and Distribution LLC. Did I get that right?
It's right in there.
Institutional foods, yeah.
Did you say international?
There you go.
That's soon. Oh,
They Sunday, institutional, it does say.
I wasn't sure that HBO Beach is part of that. I thought that was a total separate entity, had nothing to do with the pilot of the building.
Which one?
The last corporation, that's HBLD.
Yeah, John Brucey was at a meeting and basically indicated that they would be operating at the site, and that some of the employees would be for that company. So what we basically thought was that we'd get it all together.
I guess it's starting that way. How it ends up is the question, but because it's starting that way, I guess I accept that.
So 51% okay?
Yep.
I think that's pretty much it on the job, on the IDA synopsis. Unless anybody has any questions or suggestions or comments. So I think the next order of business is, Joe had, yeah, there's some proposed resolutions, and I think Joe needs to review those proposed resolutions.
Those proposed resolutions are all in your package.